Hey everyone, I'm Tegan.
I'm Sara.
We're Tegan and Sara.
And this is for Noise11.com.
And we welcome into Noise11.com, Tegan and Sara. Good to have you here. And I can't believe it's like 1995 since you've been performing as Tegan and Sara. I mean, we're just a couple of years away from 20 years of doing this professionally.
Whew, maybe we need to retire. Yeah, I mean, those first maybe 7 years, we were teenagers and young adults, so maybe the Tegan and Sara that people have come to know was very different back then. We were very young and just following our guts, and some of it really worked and some of it didn't. I mean, at one point we had a band name, then we had Sara and Tegan, then we were Tegan and Sara. So I sort of, when I count the years in my head, I start counting around 2003. That's what I like to think. So these days I'm like, we've been at it for 10 years because, the organization that we are now, with management and agents and a band and all that stuff, that started about 10 years ago. Before that it was a bit of a free-for-all. But yes, we've been making music for almost 20 years.
Okay, so like the Rolling Stones are doing their 50 and counting tour at the moment. When you do your 50 and counting tour, it'll be 2053. Yeah.
Oh my God, let's hope we get that far.
Yeah, we'll start working towards that. Congratulations on the success of the new record. I mean, this was the highest debuting album you've had so far in America, which is pretty exciting stuff. And also, it's broken you in the UK as well, hasn't it? It must be strange after all these years to have new markets discovering you.
I think that for us, the idea that we were a band still making music and had a cult following in certain places, that was always enough for us. Like the idea that that we could go play, for example, Europe was never a broken market for us, but it was it was like a cult following kind of market. We could always go to, we could always tour in Scandinavia, we could always go to France, we could always do shows in certain places. But to have more mainstream recognition and to have radio play and to have major media outlets covering the band, I guess in a way it's meaningful to us with so much work over the last 10 years in those places, to have people sort of acknowledge us or to include us in the conversation that's happening in the mainstream. It feels wonderful, and it wasn't always the goal, but I think now that we've been around long enough, you start looking for other things to sort of aspire to and to achieve and accomplish. And although the mainstream wasn't something that we necessarily aspired to when we were younger, I think now that we've accomplished all the things that we wanted to accomplish when we were 20, 25, 29, whatever it was, you have to sort of look for new things to keep yourself motivated and getting up in the morning.
I think Rolling Stone magazine called the album your most commercial album to date. Do you consider it your most commercial album to date, or does that even matter?
Well, it's a tough question to answer because it's like a funny thing where I'm sure the majority of our audience actually couldn't care less about the production or if it's a commercial record or not, but it is fascinating to me. I mean, we did make a calculated decision to make a record that would fit in the mainstream and on pop radio. And we made that decision for a lot of reasons, mainly creative ones. We just actually are really interested in pop music and really interested in a certain style of production. But we also have been sort of laboring over our career for a really long time, and we'd gotten to a point where we felt like we were spinning our wheels a bit. And a lot of people around us were doing this. Well, why aren't you just happy with what you have? Your indie darlings, your critic darlings, you play to a couple thousand people a night. Why are you wanting more? And that irritated me. I was like, do people ask guys that question? Like, is it because we're women? And it really brought up this question of like, is this sexism? Like, is it still not okay for a woman to be powerful and want to have and be ambitious and want to have success? And the answer is complicated, but it seems like initially, it was kind of not okay to say, hey, we want to be bigger. We want to reach more people. And then the conversation kind of changed because I was like, well, we've creatively satisfied ourselves and we've creatively satisfied our audience. So I guess there's really no debate. We've made a commercially successful record, but we've also made a fan successful record, like, because they love it. It's been really fascinating. And most of all, I'm just thrilled that it's getting us more exposure because I wish there had been a band like us that I could have looked up to when I was a teenager, and I wish there was more bands like us in the mainstream. I know lots of great bands that are not in the mainstream, but I think because we're women and we're assertive and articulate and political and we're also queer and we're all, we're able to reach more people, which is really amazing and says lots about where the world's at. But it's also like, I want to reach more people. I have a desire. My ambition is, it's twofold. And part of it is I want to make the world a better place. And I want to change the way that people think about people like us. So yeah, I mean, it is commercially very big compared to where we've been in the past. But I think at its core, it's still a Tegan Sara record. So,
Do you create the songs basically at home and then go into the studio with a batch of songs, or is anything actually created while you're in the studio?
You know, there's like the occasional idea that will need a little bit of tweaking or adjusting, expanding once we're in the studio. But we really, really love working at home, demoing as many ideas as possible. I think that we are the type of artists who associate being in the studio with spending a lot of money. So anything you can do before you get in, any amount of preparation you can do before you get in the studio, I think it just ends up meaning that you spend less time and spend less money ultimately. And in the past, that certainly was important for us when we would have these really tiny little budgets. So I also really like being able to work at my own pace, and sometimes an idea comes when you want it to come, and sometimes it comes when you least expect it to come. And so having to be in the studio and force ideas has never really worked for me. Although with this record, honestly, we were sort of under a fair amount of pressure, our own amount of pressure, about making some of these songs like the best songs we'd ever written and the strongest choruses we'd ever written. And we had to do a lot of that under pressure in the studio. And I think it was actually some of the best ideas that we'd come up with. So, I mean, I guess as long as I don't feel like we have to do the whole thing in the studio, I guess I'll always be open to the idea of trying to tweak under pressure.
Because the song Closer is the co-write with Greg Kirsten, who was the producer of the record. So I assume, that one was potentially tweaked in the studio.
Yeah, when I wrote Closer, I sent it to Sarah and she said, "Oh my God, it's really great, finish it," which I was like, it is finished. But I ended up actually rewriting and recording it 6 times before we went into the studio with Greg. And after a couple of days of working on it in the studio, we sort of all felt like there was still something really missing. The chorus just wasn't really kicking, because the chorus was actually the bridge. And so we left Greg for a couple of weeks to go work with Mike Elizondo on a couple other tracks. When we came back, Greg was like, "I just really think that we should try a whole new chorus," which Sarah and I were kind of like terrified, because we'd never written in the studio before and we didn't really know exactly what to do. But it was so amazing. Within like 15 minutes, Greg just was like, "Here's like instrumentally what I would love to see happen. I want it to step up, and I would feel like these chords would do that." And then he basically just policed Sarah and I for what felt like forever, but was probably about 9 hours. Just, I mean, it's so cheesy to say, but spitballing ideas, like sort of trying to complete the story that Closer was trying to tell. And so we shifted the original chorus into the bridge section, and we wrote the new chorus in the studio. So it was really amazing, because it was our first time trying to do that. And when we finally got there, there was definitely lots of high fives. We were all very proud of ourselves. We all thought we had done a really great job.
Right, so at that point, did you know it was a single?
The label had expressed, like, right from the beginning that they really loved the song. But long before that, obviously, Sarah and I felt like it was one of those first listen songs that's like, when people would listen to the 10 of the demos, they would always say, "Oh, Closer." It had that funny, like that like lilt at the beginning that just seemed to really draw people in, and that hook off the top, that piano line. I mean, right as soon as I wrote it, it really happened quickly, and I was like, "Oh, that's an earworm. That's not going away." And so, there's funny little things looking back on. I mean, it's like when Sarah wrote "Back in Your Head." I mean, she sent it to us, and we were like, that line, da 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 da. It was like, well, that's a hit. People are going to remember that. A hit, is whatever, But yeah, once we were in the studio, we definitely put a lot of time and energy into Closer. But I think all the songs on the record, like all 10 tracks that made it, could be singles in an alternate universe. If we were Katy Perry, we'd have 8 singles. Like, they all feel really, I mean, they're all so emotionally powerful, and they all represent sort of on the spectrum of who we are and love and relationships. So I don't think there's one song that's copying something from another song. They're all really original. So they're all babies to me, so I'm like, they're all hits.
Yeah, because I guess of the 10 songs, 3 of them are co-writes, really. There's another couple of songs on there that were written with other people. How did they come about?
How Come You Don't Want Me was a song that was an instrumental, actually, that Jack Antonoff from the band Fun sent me. Mm-hmm. And he and I do a little bit of writing on the side just for fun. And he sent me that instrumental, and I initially just wrote some ideas thinking that it would be something maybe he would pass on to some of the people he was working with. And I ended up actually just really liking it and sort of feeling sort of like attached to it. And almost as soon as I sent it to him, I wrote him another email and was like, how would you feel about this being included on our album, on the Tegan and Sara record? And he, you know, he was so sweet. He obviously was like happy to just do whatever. If I wanted it, he was like happy to let it go. So that was really neat, and that came together really quickly. And I think Tegan and I spent a lot of time in the, you know, in the studio, at home, whatever you want to say. We spent a lot of time working in the box, you know, writing instrumentals, tweaking, you know, finessing instrumentals and key changes and all those things. And one thing that has come from this co-writing is that instead of spending and laboring hours on, you know, drums and sounds and keyboard noises and all those things, you kind of just get these instrumentals and then you can just jump straight to the lyrics and melodies. And there's a freedom in that. And I think we had done that a lot in the co-writing stuff, like Tiesto and David Guetta and a few other side projects that we had done. But I never even consider that for a Tegan and Sara record. I almost associate, you know, the accomplishment of labor and you know, just dozens and dozens of hours writing the music. I almost associate that with Tegan and Sara, you know, like that work, I guess it's the payoff is when it finally is done. And I almost felt guilty, like just taking these instrumentals and writing over top of them, almost like they weren't as significant of work, you know, the work wasn't as significant. And I think through working with people like Greg Kirsten and working with Jack Antonoff, I realized like this is just as satisfying. I can be just as attached to this song, even if it wasn't my idea to, you know, put that chord change or whatever. And so, yeah, I feel really proud of that song, even though it's not just a Tegan and Sara song. Like, because of Jack's involvement, I think it's actually a fantastic addition to the Tegan and Sara record.
I guess Hearthrob is very much a Tegan and Sara record. If we go back to Under Feet Like Ours, I mean, this is really jumping in the DeLorean, isn't it, and going back in time.
Wow.
But that was Tegan or Sara, really, when it came to songwriting, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, really, not until Sainthood had we ever sat in a room and written together. So it very much felt like a collection of Sara songs and a collection of Tegan songs. And, you know, certainly as the years passed, you know, specifically on If It Was You and So Jealous, we started to collaborate musically with each other. So in the studio, we started to actually, you know, add more of our vocals or our guitars. But truly, you know, it wasn't until The Con and Sainthood that you really started to hear Tegan and Sara. You know, people were devastated, including our managers, when we told them that most of the background vocals that you hear on our record, so our earlier records, like if you hear a background vocal on like Living Room, for instance, that's my own background vocal for my own vocal. Like, so you didn't really hear Sara and I singing together until much later into our career. We just weren't that comfortable in the studio, and time is money, and you know your song best, so you just hop in the vocal booth and put all your ideas down. So yeah, it's funny. I think that Hearthrob is probably the most Tegan and Sara sounding record that we've ever made, because we're all over each other's songs. You know, Sara actually co-wrote not only the chorus to Closer, but she also co-wrote the bridge to I Was a Fool. She co-wrote the B chorus for I Couldn't Be Your Friend, and the bridge for Love They Say. And actually the bridge for Drove Me Wild too. So, I mean, it truly is a Tegan and Sara collaboration, more than anything ever, you know, that we've ever done. So, but, you know, the earlier work is really cool too, because you can really see our personality shining through. You can really see what Sara and I were both we were interested in very different things. And ultimately it's that natural growth, that evolution towards today that created Tegan and Sara. It was allowing us, we never pressured each other. It wasn't like, well, no, this song's too different from what we're doing. You know, it was like, that song's great. It's a great song. Let's put it on the record. So Sara and I were always very creatively supportive of one another right from the beginning.
There was nothing from the second album, nothing from The Art of Business at the Sydney show the other night. Under Feet Like Ours, obviously, there was nothing from that as well. I think the set list kicks in at Living Room, 2002. Is that how it is from now on for you?
There's a few songs on those early records that, with a fair amount of surgery, I think that, you know, they'll rear their head every once in a while. There's a song off of Business of Art called Not With You that we dragged out a couple of years ago, and we started fooling with it a little bit. But I think it's the truth is this: it's less about now making fun of the aesthetic. I used to be really obsessed with, like, oh God, like so embarrassed by some of the choices that we'd made, and I definitely feel that diminishing for me, like that embarrassment that comes from listening to that music. But the truth is that I'm just not that interested in the songs. Like, I think that we were good songwriters for our age, and I think it's really special that we just sort of like naturally developed songwriting skills. We weren't trained in any way. We just sort of like fell into it and sort of as like a spazzy hobby, and it just has turned into this really cool job and career and all of that. But the truth is that the songwriting is really, for me anyways, like basic, and I don't like the songs. Like when I think about playing them over and over and over again, I get really bored. Whereas like even though some of the songs that we've written for Hearthrob, for example, seem much simpler and more straightforward than anything we've done in the past, they're truly more dynamic and complex than they let on, and that is exciting for me. And perfecting something that seems simple is much harder than, halfway playing something that's confusing and complicated and doesn't have a form, which a lot of our early music was a little bit more abstract in terms of the arrangements and that sort of thing. And I just don't find them very exciting to play. So whereas like, for example, Walking with a Ghost is one of the most simple songs probably that we've ever written, and yet I don't ever feel like I've ever once played it perfectly. Like it's almost like playing, keeping time on a drum kit is one of the most complicated things you can do, and it's like, I think the material that I'm most interested in our back catalog, playing night after night after night, are songs like that, where I just wonder if I'll ever play it right.
Me
Well,
too.
it's good to have you down here for the 7th time in Australia. Good news that the 40 years from the 50 and counting tour, it's coming up. Tickets go on sale in just 39 short years for that one.
39 years from now.
Tegan and Sara, good to have you here at noise11.com.
Thank you.
I was a fool.